camera here and get started, yeah? Okay? All right, let's do it. Go ahead, Martin.
I'm Martin Colthorpe, Programme Director of the International Literature Festival Dublin. I'm delighted to be welcoming our panel, Cara Augustenborg from Friends of the Earth Ireland, to Avi Lewis, the director of the film, will be joining us in a moment.
The empty chair.
Naomi Klein, author of This Changes Everything, and next to our chair, Eamon Meehan from Troca, Ireland. Thank you very much. Please welcome.
Okay, I'm coming, you guys. Get started without me.
Okay, great. So, good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome. I have no doubt that you all enjoyed watching the film. I'm surprised that so few of you actually understand Greek. But anyway, we watched that piece twice, but it was great, fantastic. The people from the sacrifice zones. That's just one phrase that struck me and that will stay with me, and it just strikes me as being so absolutely true as a way of defining what we're doing to our planet and what we need to do to rescue both the planet and ourselves. So we have about an hour for this conversation. We are so lucky to have Naomi and Avi with us, and also to have Cara from Friends of the Earth and UCD. And I've no doubt that we will learn a huge amount over the next hour or so. We'll spend a little bit of time getting input here on the stage, and then we'll open it up to yourselves for questions and if you have any comments as well. So maybe I'll start with you, Avi. Would you like to give us an update on some of the things that are happening perhaps in Canada and some recent events that you want to talk about?
Well, sure. There are so many things that have happened since we finished filming and since the film came out last September. I think Naomi will update some of the ongoing struggles, but I think the one that is absolutely preoccupying us pretty much every minute of every day right now is that Fort McMurray, the town at the center of oil extraction in Alberta, is on fire. I don't know if you guys have seen, you've seen as been reporting here in Ireland, that this is just a disaster of unbelievable proportions that's unfolding in our country. It's there's 90,000 people that have been evacuated from that town, where we spent a lot of time filming, where we have, close friends. When the fire swept through, there are wildfires in the boreal forest, as a matter of course. There are clearly more wildfires than there used to be. They're starting earlier. It's been a very dry winter in Alberta and high winds. So when the fire started, some people who couldn't get, this city is 5 hours north of Edmonton, which is the capital in Alberta. People who couldn't get south towards the city had to flee north. So there's 25 people that went up, and north of the city there are just 25,000, yeah. North of the city are just there's a couple of big refineries up there that you saw in the movie, and there's a bunch of the camps where the tar sands workers live. So there's 25,000 people that took shelter in the camps, the worker camps, and then couldn't get south. So at dawn this morning, a convoy of like 1,500 vehicles started rolling down the highway towards Edmonton, with helicopters going overhead to make sure the fire, which is still around the highway, wasn't impeding progress. And there are, tens of thousands of people who, 1,200 buildings at least, probably more now, that have been destroyed in that town. And, just a massive disruption in Alberta. Crystal Lehman, whom you saw in the film, one of the main characters, she lives on the Beaver Lake Cree Nation Reservation, which is right in the middle of this area. And it's a community of about 300 people. They're taking they were supposed to take 10,000 evacuees in the last 48 hours. So there's this extraordinary conflagration literally happening in and around Fort McMurray. And a conversation going on as, we're in full-on disaster mode there right now. But at the same time, some people want to talk about the climate crisis and how, it has definitely exacerbated the wildfires. Wildfire season is, since the 1970s, wildfire season is, like almost 2 months longer than it used to be. The wildfires are starting a month earlier than they did. There's no question that it's one of the many natural processes that is being accelerated and exacerbated by the climate crisis. But it's also very political to talk about that in the middle of a disaster. So in Canada, there's a big conversation going on. The Green Party leader said this is probably connected, she was quite careful the way she said it, probably connected to the climate crisis. And our new hot, buff, charming young Prime Minister felt it necessary to say that that kind of talk was not helpful in a moment like this. So there's a very fraught moment around the place that was really at the center of this film in Canada right now.
Yeah, and what the other major development since the film was finished, the film came out at the Toronto International Film Festival. I just start by saying hi. I'm thrilled to be with you guys. This is our second day in Dublin, and so much gratitude to the festival for hosting a really wonderful event around the book last night, and now this film screening today. It's really been an amazing couple of days, and meeting with local activists and hearing about wonderful things that are going on here. And Cara's going to be filling you guys in about how, if you're feeling angry and you want to get involved, and this, hopefully riles you up a little bit, Cara's going to be giving you some very concrete things that you can do locally. But yeah, so the film came out at the Toronto International Film Festival in September, so 8 months ago. And since then, the biggest change in the landscape, I guess, is that the price of oil has collapsed, right? So this was just starting to happen. It was at the early stages, but it's had a huge impact on the Alberta tar sands because, extracting that oil, which is this heavy crude, right, that you need to mine in order to get it out, it's very expensive, and this boom didn't actually take off until the price of oil hit $100 a barrel. So now that it's hovering around 30, a lot of investors are pulling out, and so this is simply to say that this community is being devastated right now, but they were facing a big tragedy before this fire even hit. 100,000 workers lost their jobs, right? So, so this is taking place in a very particular context, and families who couldn't pay their bills because they'd lost their jobs are now lost their homes altogether, right? And that's why it is very important how we talk about it. And there's been some really unfortunate sort of loose talk about, well, this is karma, as if it is the fault of the workers, that they need to feed their families. There's Irish workers who've gone all the way to the tar sands because this is really the only sector that has been creating well-paying jobs for people with this skill set. So one of the most exciting things that's happened since the film came out is that one of the last people you heard from was a man named Liam Hildebrand from he was wearing a hard hat, and he was talking about how tar sands workers have the skills that are needed to work in renewables. And in fact, Alberta has some of the best conditions for renewables. And he's launched an organization of oil sands workers demanding that the government put them back to work, putting up solar panels on public buildings, on schools. And it's gotten a lot of traction, a lot of press, so that's been a really exciting development. Many of the campaigns that we document in the film have won since the film came out. It's really striking. You met some amazing people from the Northern Cheyenne Reservation who've been fighting coal mining and fighting this coal train, and you met Mike and Alexis, who were working in solidarity with them. That rail project was just finally canceled just a couple of weeks ago. The mine that they were all gathered around and going, can you believe what they're going to do to this place? That huge coal mine, it would have been the largest open pit coal mine in North America had it been built. That line, the Otter Creek mine, has been canceled just since the film, just in the past few months. That, I was just listening backstage, that amazing speech that Crystal gave outside on Capitol Hill, and she was at a rally against the Keystone XL pipeline. And many of you know that pipeline has been canceled, also since the film came out. So, you know, there's been some really, really important victories. Many fights are still, you know, ongoing. We come to this late, right? We've got a lot of catching up to do. But the anti-fracking movement has been going from victory to victory. In fact, fracking's been banned in New York State since we finished the film. So I'm going to throw it to Cara to talk about some of what's going on here from Friends of the Earth Ireland. So thank you for being here.
Thanks. Thanks. It's an honor to be here talking with you and with Avi and Naomi. Some of us got a chance to see Naomi's talk in the RDS last night, and afterward we were talking, and all of us commented that since the film and the book, we've all been approached by people who've never engaged in climate before and have said, I read the book, I saw the film, I want to get involved. So I think it's a real call to action, and it's particularly has a lot of impact because Avi and Naomi are coming from a different perspective than those of us who are traditionally in the climate disciplines, who can tell you...
You noticed.
Yeah. I mean, we can tell you what will happen to the earth if you act or you don't act, but it's those of you from outside, from the financial sector, from the IT sector, that are really going to make the difference and have the impact. So if you felt the call to act watching this movie, I have 3 big campaigns going on here in Ireland I'd love to bring your attention to. And the first one is from the organization that's near and dear to my heart, Friends of the Earth. I've been volunteering with them for about 7 years now, and on Monday we're launching our Fossil-Free Ireland campaign. We've gotten together with Friends of the Earth, England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, who will all be launching the same campaign on Monday as part of our Fossil-Free Europe conference here in Woodkey in Dublin. And what we're calling for is an end to all onshore extraction of fossil fuels in our countries by 2020. So that means no more coal in places like Wales, no more onshore drilling of oil anywhere, no more fracking anywhere, and especially here in Ireland, no more peat by 2020. On hard over the next 2 years, but we really need public support, so please go to foe.ie and get involved and give us your support, because that's what it takes to make this kind of change, and we have to make it quickly.
Can I push you on something?
Yes.
Because as we've been in a huge pipeline debate in Canada these days, there's lots of people who work in these industries, fewer than there used to be. And these industries, like the coal industry and the oil industry right now, are in a period of decline. But is there a piece of the campaign that addresses the fact that no worker should pay for the transition?
Yes.
Because it was not their fault that those were the only jobs that were available to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has to be a just transition, and particularly for our peatlands in Ireland that employ a lot of people, and we have to consider how are we going to transition them to renewable energy. So that is part of it.
And that's what government is for. That's
yes.
sort of,
and this is why
that's why we pay taxes and
political campaign. Yes. The second one, I'm sure Eamon can talk more about this, but is Tróca's own work on divestment, which means pulling out investment money from investment funds that's in dirty energy and moving it to clean energy. And this campaign has been really successful over the last couple of years in America, and it has the potential to be even more successful here in Ireland. So I'm sure if you go to, is it Tróca.org, Eamon?
Tróca.org will get you there.
Yeah, to get engaged in that. And it's also been a strong campaign in universities like Trinity and in Queen's. So that's the other second one to get involved in. And Naomi reminded us last night that us environmentalists are very good at saying no and telling you what we don't want, but we don't often tell you what we do want, and we do need a plan. And so our equivalent to the yes or the plan started just before the general election, where 30 academics from all over Ireland finally climbed down from their ivory towers, and I can say that because I was one of them, and we said, look, climate isn't getting attention in the general election, but it's imperative, it's urgent, and so we're finally getting political. And those 30 academics called for a citizens' convention to figure out how we make this just transition to a low-carbon society. We called that initiative Post-Carbon Ireland, and we got support from every single political party that said if they were elected, they would go ahead with the Citizens' Convention. We now have a government.
Finally.
It's time to make it happen. We had 800 signatures from the public before the election. We need more signatures to start pushing that forward now, so it's postcarbonireland.com, and we hope to really make that convention happen, because this transition needs to be citizen-led. It needs your input, and it's our yes and it's our ask, and it's very similar to what I think the LEAP manifesto is about that you guys have been working on. So maybe you can inspire us with some advice on how to make that happen.
We should talk about that. Can I just point out that if everyone here signed right now, you'd get to over 1,000.
Yes. So
That
postcarbonisland.com.
seems like an easy
Get on your
ask,
phones.
people. Let's do it.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say is all of those were political initiatives, or we need to push the government because this is a big change that needs to happen. But I think people like Asad Rehman in your film mentioned the importance of people power and bottom-up approach, and that needs to happen too. And let's not forget that 6 months ago, the Midlands were knee-deep in floodwaters, and we all remember poor Joan Burton falling out of her canoe when she went down there to see them, and every single politician was down there taking pictures in front of the floodwaters, and they were all saying, we're going to expect more of this because of climate change, and we need to prepare for it. And in that moment, I naively thought, wow, we've reached acceptance, we can start the hard work to make the transition. And yet it's been 6 months, and winter is 6 months away, and I don't think any of us are any safer, right? So we need to start doing this. We can't wait for the politicians to cop on. They're taking too long. We need to start at a local level, building resilience, making the transition. So in whatever way, be it the food movement or local community power, which is happening now, and you can find out a lot more about all the different communities in Ireland that are trying to make the transition and own their own power through fo.ie. We need to start doing these things. And I'll quote my colleague Lorna Gold at Trogra, who's a friend of yours I know and couldn't make it tonight. But last summer at their divestment conference, she said, we need to get behind wherever the energy is right now. So please do that. It means a better Ireland. It means our rural economy could be revitalized. It's a healthier place for all of us to live. What we're asking for is not to change everything, but to better everything. So please join us in that. Thank you.
I think this betters everything would have been as good a title.
Maybe before we, I just want to ask 1 or 2 questions here to the panel before we open it up, but just on divestment and Trogra's campaign. The Irish National Investment Fund.
So for all the people who are watching, what is Trogra? Because we're not.
Okay, Trogra is an Irish NGO. It was set up in 1973 by the Irish Catholic bishops. We are a development and a humanitarian organisation. Basic principles around social justice. Our strapline is working for a just world. And I suppose about 10 or 12 years ago, we began to see very clearly in the work that we were doing in parts of Africa, Latin America and Asia, that people were being impacted by climate. That the climate was changing and that it was having a very severe impact, in particular on rural communities. And we could see a drift from the land to the cities, but also it was much more difficult for people to produce food, to do the basics, to feed themselves and their families. And we did some research with Maynooth University 3 years ago in Ethiopia, Malawi, Honduras, Philippines. And the research showed something incredible. Increasing temperatures, increasing drought, and a huge impact on people's existence, I suppose the very survival of rural communities in particular. So that was a wake-up call for us, and at that point we decided that we needed to do something about this. So we put responding to climate change at the very heart of our work, both in terms of the work we're doing in those countries, but also what we're doing around advocacy. So our engagement with the public here in Ireland and with our government. And essentially, climate justice is what we call it. Climate change is about the planet, climate justice is about the people and what's happening to the people. So just very briefly, in terms then of the divestment campaign, the Irish National Investment Fund essentially is, I suppose, what is remaining of our National Pension Reserve Fund following 10 years of collapse and crisis. But there is something around 75 or 76 million euro of that fund invested in essentially oil companies and coal companies. So our challenge to the government, our ask, is that the government would take that money, divest it from those fossil companies and reinvest it. in new forms of energy, clean energy, so that it's about divesting, but it's also about reinvesting, so it's about doing something positive. Now, this is going to be a struggle. It's not a huge amount of money, so essentially what we are talking about here is something that is very symbolic. The Irish government, we as a people, have done this in the past in relation to cluster munitions in 2007. Our government changed the legislation so that our National Investment Fund could not be invested in companies that manufacture cluster munitions, and this was part of a global treaty. So we've done it once, and we can do it again. So as Avi said, if you go onto our website or Cara, throker.org, you will find it all there. And the more people that we can get to support us, the better, and the quicker that we will be able to deliver on this. So, is there anything that you guys would like to tell us about your experiences in Canada in the last couple of years, just around citizen mobilization, new ways of campaigning, new things that are engaging with people that we could learn from and that we could start doing ourselves quickly?
Naomi's throwing it to me. Okay. Well, I think one of the interesting things that happened in the process of the book and the film, so Naomi and I decided to do a book and a film at the same time. They were parallel projects, which meant, you know, a lot of the decisions about what to follow in the film were made at the very beginning of the research phase of the book. So for people who have read the book, you see it's a very different work, the film. It's got a different emphasis, it's got a similar mission. And then the sequel, the sort of living sequel to both the book and the film, is for some completely inexplicable reason, we decided to launch a political manifesto with the film, because we weren't busy enough, because launching a film is easy or something. But at the Toronto International Film Festival last fall, we launched something called the LEAP Manifesto. Now this was preceded by a process of cross-sectoral organizing in Canada, because we saw all these new alliances in our country between First Nations and environmental groups and labor unions and anti-poverty and anti-austerity groups who are trying to come together and find common cause in their struggles. And Naomi's book is a fantastic resource for connecting the dots among a whole range of social justice issues and arguing that the climate crisis, as the film says, is really responding in a way with the ambition and the urgency required. It's the best chance we're ever going to get to actually build a better world. So we saw these new alliances emerging and tried to get involved in the cross-sectoral organizing world. We held a meeting a year ago, brought together 60 different activists from across a huge range of causes in Canada, and spent a couple of days together, first investigating together some past attempts where different movements have worked together, either successfully or disastrously, and looked at kind of our own collective history of different movements trying to work together. And then we spent the second half of that two-day meeting allowing ourselves to dream and get to the yes together. Would there be a common vision among all those movements of how to get our country off fossil fuels in a way that attacks inequality, racism, that could even heal the wounds that go back to the founding of our country in the relationship with the original inhabitants? And we came up with a set of 15 big policy demands. We called it the LEAP Manifesto. It was a document that was written by consensus, which, you know, documents written by committee are usually not that inspiring, but this time we had a decent writer who was helping with the editing. And so the LEAP Manifesto was born as an expression of a desire on the part of Canadians for a vastly more ambitious program that not only addresses the crisis of the climate, but also the crisis of inequality, the disaster that austerity has wrought in our communities, and all of the other intersecting crises that we face. We got a bunch of...
And it was building on so much work that has been done by the climate justice movement globally, everything from the Cochabamba meeting in 2010 of social movements that led to various declarations and common ground, and just the work that has been done in articulating what a just transition would look like by climate justice groups around the world, and certainly in North America. I think what makes the LEAP a little bit different is two things. One is just that we were careful to not just have it be a list, but for it to really be about the connections. So, for instance, there's a demand that all workers, regardless of immigration status, should have full rights, right? But in making, and that we should be opening our borders to many more migrants and refugees, but in making that demand, we also make the connection between wars fought over fossil fuels, trade deals that our governments have pushed, and the impacts of climate change that we have disproportionately contributed to as a wealthy country, as being part of why this is not charity, this is responsibility. So it's really about sort of trying to tell another story in connecting the dots, because one of the things that came out of that meeting is, oh my God, we have no shortage of manifestos, lists of demands, all of this, but so what's going to be different about this? And the thing that we wanted to be different is that we wanted it to speak to people who were not already activists. We wanted it to be outward facing, right? And we launched in the middle of an election campaign. So we saw it very much as a political document that we wanted regular Canadians to be able to read and relate to. And I think you are in something of an interesting situation here in Ireland, where you have finally this new government that's formed, and they articulated their common ground, and they forgot all about climate change. There's no mention of climate change. Right? And frankly, the Lead Manifesto came out of us just watching all of our major political parties fight over the crown in our recent election, and they mostly forgot about climate change too. I mean, the Green Party didn't, but there was definitely a decision made by the other major parties to de-emphasize climate change. They decided it wasn't, a really sellable electoral issue. They were talking about a lot of other things, and so we just refused to let another election pass without this being a central issue, because we're out of time, and we need our politicians to have a mandate. And if they don't get that mandate because they ran on it, then they're going to have to get it because we're demanding it in huge numbers.
And it sort of feels like when we were in that election period last fall in Canada, it actually looked like we might have a coalition government as a result. We have a first past the post system where we now we ended up getting a majority government from one of the centrist parties that won more or less absolute power with 39% of the popular vote. But at the time the Lead Manifesto came out, it looked like they might have to form a coalition with another party. Now, you guys have coalitions all the time, and they do need to get their legitimacy from somewhere. So this might be a really interesting moment in Ireland where they're finally cobbling together a government. They have not emphasized climate change. If you had a movement that was demanding a people's, what do you call it? A convention, a people's convention. If we can make a manifesto sexy in Canada, you can make a convention sexy in Ireland. So a people's convention where people get to determine how this country changes direction and how the shift off of fossil fuels can massively benefit people who have been suffering in this country under unspeakable austerity for many years, certainly since 2008 and the crash.
Yeah.
And how it can be a really exciting, inspiring, ambitious, positive agenda, which we found in Canada has really resonated with a lot of people. We've had 40,000 people sign the manifesto, 200 organizations, and we've sparked a national debate about more radical and more exciting responses to climate and other crises.
Okay. And the good news is that the Green Party is back in Ireland. We've had 2 Green members of Parliament elected, and John Gormley, former leader of the Green Party, is here as well. John, you're very welcome. Good to see you. So let's open it up to yourselves for a while and see what you would like to talk about, what questions you might have. Do we need to bring the lights up so that we can see who's asking the questions? There is a roving microphone as well, so I can see one hand up, so we'll start. Okay, the microphone is over here, so we'll start at this side and then we'll move it into the middle.
Okay, thank you very much for a wonderful film, and I saw you as well last night as well. A bit obsessed, but I just had a quick question. I loved your book, The Shock Doctrine, as well, and I know that you tracked there the birth of neoliberalism in South America and the human rights movement there as well, and how they operated in tandem, and how a lot of NGOs, they described human rights abuses and tortures that were happening there as if they were natural and normal. This was a human thing to do. But really, what was happening, if NGOs had looked a bit deeper, they would have seen that there was trade unionists, that there was teachers that were being tortured. And I just wonder as well, in Ireland,
and I suppose in many other countries too. What my question is that human rights and environmentalism tend to be defined and owned by a certain exclusive community up until now, a certain educated, a certain class, who get to define what rights are and who get to define what environmentalism is. And I suppose my question for you is how do we cross that boundary and help people to own in their own language what rights are, what environmentalism is, and how that has worked in Canada, and how do you feel we can help people to speak of these things in their own language? So, thank you.
Very much for that.
Great question. Yeah, thank you. You know, it's interesting because the way you describe the birth of that human rights discourse, much of it dates back to the 1970s in this period in Latin America. It was a relatively new framework, a way of approaching this kind of violence, of sort of isolating it as a rights violation, having a legal approach to it. And it wasn't that so much, you know, in my research, it wasn't so much that it was seen as sort of human nature, but it was disconnected from the interests it was serving, right? So I think the point being that, you know, the reason 30,000 people were disappeared, you know, in Argentina and thousands in Chile in this period was because they were the people who were standing in the way of the economic project that the military represented. And by sort of deracinating the rights from the reason for the attacks, we didn't get at those connections, and there were a whole lot of reasons why that happened and whose interest that served. But the fact is, I think at its very core, what we are talking about here and what we're talking about doing here is overcoming this legacy of siloing, right? That is all about the sort of hyper-professionalizing of issues and campaigns, and the loss of broad-based social movements that have survived in many parts of the world, but less so in the global north, right? And now I guess political parties are the only places that people see at where you can organize across issues in many cases. You have some broad-based groups, like in Canada we have a great organization called the Council of Canadians that is not associated with one particular issue. They're involved in trade issues, they're involved in environmental issues, and human rights issues and water rights in particular. And they are one of our most important partners in creating this space. And they've been using all of their local chapters to hold meetings about the LEAP and so on. But we don't have many spaces like this. And a lot of people don't trust political parties, right? That's not where they're choosing to do politics. So this is really a work of reconstruction, really, of rebuilding this connective tissue. You know, Avi mentioned we hosted this meeting, but not because we led this, but actually because we were hearing from people working in various pieces of this puzzle. You know, people working on anti-austerity, people working on migrant rights or climate justice or labor rights, that there actually wasn't a place to come together, right? That was kind of neutral, that wasn't owned by one of the people. So it's not like, okay, Greenpeace invites the union that represents car stance workers. That's a negotiation. That's different. That's more loaded. So I think that's a big part of the task, is creating spaces where we can actually talk to each other and find that language, find that genuine language, and just recognize that for very complex reasons, we've ended up in a lot of boxes. This is true in academia. It's true in activism. We've become too specialized, and we've lost that ability. And now we confront problems that are deeply, deeply intersectional, and we don't have intersectional spaces to figure out what to do about it. So we have to build them.
Okay, thanks, Naomi. Microphone is over here.
Well, hi. Great book and great film. Thank you very much. So my question is really, if we had complete compliance from corporations and governments and society to drop fossil fuels and transition to a fossil-free economy, how ready are we to do that in technological and practical terms? You know, I guess we've heard a lot about the fact that maybe we need nuclear, maybe we need, I don't know, carbon sequestration, but, you know, how ready are we? That's what I want to know, really. Can we just drop fossil fuels? And I suppose one of the parts of that question is, Like, do we really just need to reduce our consumption of energy radically, or, you know, assuming that we don't change our energy habits, can we still become fossil, you know, fuel free?
Nice question.
Yeah, I can take the first part specifically to Ireland. So Eamon Ryan, the leader of the Green Party, told me about a year ago that, you know, we had to become fossil fuel free in Ireland by 2050, which is only 34 years from now. And I said, that's impossible. And he said, go out and figure it out for yourself. And so I did. And there's lots of peer-reviewed research out there. So the first place to start is Green Plan Ireland is a peer-reviewed document by, is it John Conley? Yeah. Dave Conley, out of Denmark. Yes. Denmark.
Yeah, he's Irish.
Yeah, he's Irish out of Denmark. Anyway, and he has proven that we could completely decarbonize our energy system by 2050, no problem. There's work out of Engineers Ireland that has shown we could completely transform our housing heating systems to electricity-based systems. And create 100,000 more jobs or something, yeah. So plenty of evidence. You can look it up on my website, Augustenborg.com. I have links to all the evidence to show that we could go completely fossil fuel free in energy, transport, and heat by 2050, and the benefits would be enormous, not just for the climate, but all the social benefits and economic benefits too. So it's totally technologically possible, and the only thing missing is political will.
I would just quickly add that I do, you know, on the second part of your question around the demand side, I mean, are we going to be able to just keep consuming as much energy as we consume? And I think the answer to that is no. You know, our consumption habits, you know, in the wealthy parts of the wealthy world are completely out of control, you know. You know, I would steer people to Kevin Anderson's writing and research on this. I rely on his research a lot. I quote him a lot in the book. And he points out that when you have a society that is fully based on fossil fuels, as you engage in this great transition, you know, of the kind that Cara is describing, you are going to burn a lot of fossil fuels. I mean, we're talking about kind of like New Deal era, Marshall Plan era, huge investments in changing the way we move ourselves around, changing the way we power our economy. And because we now rely on fossil fuels, we're going to burn a lot of fossil fuels in the process. And we have delayed climate action for so long that we need to be cutting our emissions by 10% a year in wealthy countries like this one, and relatively wealthy countries like this one, and a country where I live. And you can't do that unless you address the demand side. So we are going to have to consume less. We, those who are over-consuming, not everyone, but we can't shy away from that reality. You know, Arundhati Roy likes to say that the green environmentalism, the environmentalism of the cities is all about how do I change without changing, right? And we're always looking for that, you know, but how can we change without it changing absolutely anything about how I live, right? So I think we need to be honest that there's going to be, we're going to have to consume less.
But there's a dimension here too that position is usually portrayed as a future of sacrifice. And in fact, and I'm not a big one for opinion polls, but when people are asked about the things that make them happy, nobody ever says buying more shit makes me feel better, right? In fact, you know, we know that we have a kind of a sickness. It's the sort of junk food consumption culture. The more we consume, kind of the worse we feel, and the lonelier and more alienated we feel. And then what really gives people deep satisfaction is connecting with each other and connecting with the natural world. And we need more time and more spaces to do that. And I think that people who find ways to consume less don't find that it's a dour and dire life of sacrifice, but it actually can be a very fulfilling life. It actually can remind us of the things that really, really make us feel good. And I think we need to address the spiritual dimension of this as well, because it's not just about energy consumption, it's about depleting finite resources on every front. It's not just the climate crisis. We're slamming, as Naomi says, we're slamming up against limits on every front. Water, natural resources of every kind. And so this notion that we can have infinite growth on a finite planet, everybody knows this is unsustainable. And yet our economy is still based on precisely that. So we really need a shift in values. And it's going to be a relief when we do it, I think.
And this is why I think the Pope's encyclical has been so important. And this is when I first connected with Troker's work and met Lorna. I was at the Vatican at the conference to launch the encyclical. Weird as that may be.
Where Naomi meets all her new friends.
Yeah,
Vatican rag.
Secular Jewish feminists at the Vatican. And no, but you know, that the phrase in the encyclical that I think is you know, most resonant and most important for us to carry, at least for me, is the throwaway culture, and that applies to the way we treat refugees. It applies to the way we are treating the planet, but it's also the way we treat stuff, right? We just you know, everything is disposable in our culture. So I think that's a nice way of drawing out those connections. The other piece of it, and we didn't mention this about the leap, that I think is sort of really, really important in addressing this issue of how we consume, is valuing other kinds of work, including the work of caregiving and land protection, and valuing it as low carbon work, as climate work, right? So I guess we're going to change. We have to change the balance of our economy so that the parts of our economy that are just about consumption and speculation do have to contract, but we can expand those parts of our economy that are not at war with life on Earth, and those are the parts of the economy and society that happen to also bring us the most happiness and fulfillment. And strengthen our communities.
So it's about green jobs, our education and healthcare and long-term care and taking care of children, and the arts and you know, even some academics. No, but this is the existing low-carbon economy. It's already a huge part of our economy.
Naomi mentioned the Vatican last July. I was going to come to that a little bit later before we close, but if you're interested in reading about Naomi's experiences in the Vatican, I think it was the New Yorker from last July or August. You'll find it online. It's just
all my wardrobe challenges, all of
and if you really want to, if you like, find some way of integrating all of this, the spiritual dimension, I would recommend that you, all of us essentially, he's writing to every person on this planet. It's not your typical Vatican document. It is accessible, it's readable, and it is for all of us. So I'd recommend that you go out and find it and get stuck into it. And he says, the cry of the earth is the cry of the poor. That is the line that defines the whole document, and I think it's what defines the film that we saw here tonight. You know, where the earth is being damaged. It is the people, the poor people, those who rely on the land, who survive off of it, who are being damaged and destroyed and paying the price as well. So the cry of the earth is the cry of the poor. Okay, we're over here for the next question.
Is this live? First of all, thank you so much for the positive nature of the film and the book and so on. In terms of woman power, that's the kind I like to hear about rather than Hillary Clinton's time, which is so acquiescent. Now, I just want to make 2 points with the question. The first point is, I've just come back from 9 weeks in the United States. I ran a couple of workshops on the West Coast, one in lucid dreaming at the Lucidity Festival. The key message was we become what we think. Neuroplasticity, geomorphic behavior as societies, we're on the cusp of transformation, but we're short of transformation. And there are so many initiatives such as Place in Oakland, which is a working laboratory, if you like, demonstrating sustainability in action. And whereas it's completely illegal, completely spontaneous, the mayor is frequently there supporting Place in Oakland. Now my question turns on those 2 points, which is, we've just returned a government today, after 70 days, which says virtually nothing, as you have said, about these issues. We elected that government. I would suggest the main reason is fear. As the young man in the hard hat said, there's a resistance to change because people are worried about their children, their health, their transport, their commute, their mortgage, blah, blah, blah. And the Irish people have voted in a way that exemplifies fear. And my question is, how do we transition past that fear? how do we, using new media, using film writing, as Naomi's wonderful books do, it gets through to people that they can safely vote for the sort of impassioned speech that Eamon Ryan made in the Dáil this week? How do we overcome fear?
Well, so I mean, this is one of the things that we really struggle with. The question of how to overcome fear, I think, is at the heart of the approach both of Naomi's book and my film, in that it speaks to the dynamic between resistance and cultivating alternatives. It really is this question, when people rise up and say no, it's usually because they're protecting something that's threatened. And there is fear involved in that. So, you know, the politics of fear and the cynical exploitation of fear is something that's different from people being scared of what's happening to their land and their culture and trying to protect it. But going beyond that has to do with building the world that we want to live in. And I think we've seen a massive shift in activism of all kinds in the past couple of decades towards not just saying no to the things that we think are damaging, but saying yes. And on the local level, usually cultivating communities, different kinds of energy sources, different kinds of production and exchange, the rise of worker cooperatives around the world, and citizens movements of all kinds. People in various parts of Southern Europe who have been trying to reclaim democracy through citizen processes. You see on every front that people are moving from the no to the yes. And I think that in our work we were attentive to that balance, where you see the urgency and the power that people build when they're trying to stop something that threatens them, but also the inspiration that's possible when people start modeling a better way of living together. So I would just say that, you know, of course we're not going to answer that question, but we're certainly attentive to that dynamic, and I think people in movements generally really are increasingly. Our friend John Jordan, who's a great activist and artist on this continent, likes to say that resistance and alternatives are twin strands of our activist DNA, and they need to intertwine and support each other.
And people are scared because they're being told to be afraid, right? I mean, we're up against a huge amount of propaganda from the fossil fuel industry. Much of it is disguised propaganda, telling people, you know, your lights will turn off, you will lose your job, you know, you will be back in the dark ages, you know, again and again and again. And people see those ads on television more than they hear from climate scientists, right?
And even when you start talking about it, helicopters flying over.
But you
Where's
know
my tinfoil hat?
You know, people say, well, this is the government that people voted for, right? But you know, I don't know what the elections were like here. But I know that in a lot of elections I've followed, people have not been given an appealing option and seen what really bold, transformational vision looks like. And I think there's evidence that when there are candidates that are doing that, people lose some of that fear and go, well, let's try it. And then, and in those cases when people are building the alternatives, creating the jobs, lowering their emissions, we need to amplify those stories. And you know, there are more stories now than when we finished the film, or that we can point to them. We need to do everything we can to tell those stories. I mean, we point to Germany for a very good reason. They created 400,000 jobs in their energy transition. We need to be talking about this all the time, you know?
Can I interrupt for 1 second? I know Irish people have incredible resilience for conversation. But the people watching
let's say goodbye.
Should we say goodbye to the people who are watching online?
You guys want to say goodbye? Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Look at all these beautiful people.
Yeah, see ya.